Alright guys, so now that we have looked at an overview of the cardiovascular system, it is now important that we take a deeper look into the entire cardiovascular system. Now in this video, we are going to start with the heart. Now we are going to look at the topography of the heart. So before we go deeper into looking at the gross anatomical structure of the human heart, let us take a look at the complete topographic anatomy or the topography of the heart. And in looking at the topography of the heart, we are going to look at it under three key headings. One, we are going to look at holotopy. Then two, we are going to look at skeletopy. And three, we are looking at the syntopy. So what does these three terms mean? The holotopy is basically talking about the positioning of the heart or an organ inside of the body, right? Where basically we can find this particular organ. So that is what the holotopy talks about. Skeletopy, they're talking about the projection of this organ to skeletal structures. For example, in the heart, we are looking at the ribs or some other organs, their relation to, for example, the vertebral column. Then we are looking at syntopy. We are looking at the structures around a particular organ or the relation of the organ to other organ in the body. For example, in this case, we are looking at the heart. So under the syntopy, we are going to look at the structures around the heart. Now let's go into looking at the topography of the heart, starting with the holotopy. That is, where can we basically find the heart in the human body? So this is just a sketch of the thoracic cage, right? Now, the holotopy, so basically the heart is found in the thoracic cavity in a place called middle mediastinum. Now, the heart is located in the middle mediastinum of the thoracic cage. Now, what does this word mean, mediastinum? So basically, in this thoracic cage, we have two very important structures, which are the lungs. So one on the right and one on the left. So between the two lungs is a space created, and that is what we call the mediastinum. So let's explain what we are seeing here. So basically, what we are seeing here is the clavicle, and these are the ribs. So let us label them clearly for easy understanding. This is the first rib, this is the second, this is the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12. So we know that the thoracic cage is made up of 12 pairs of ribs. 12 pairs of ribs, and this structure passing here is the sternum. So we call this one the sternum. So all the ribs are attaching to the sternum via the costal cartilages, right? So we are seeing this smaller structure here called the xiphoid process. Now, this is going to help us to clearly understand the skeletopy of the heart. So now here is it. For the skeletopy, let us first of all look at the key landmarks or key borders here of the heart to be able to understand which border is in relation to which rib. So the heart has basically four major borders. So we have the superior border, we have the inferior border, we have the right and the left borders, and most importantly, we have something we call the apex of the heart. Now let us clearly picture these borders here because they are very important for clinical examination of the heart. Now, these anatomical borders, which is the skeletopy of the heart, the superior border of the heart is from the second costal cartilage on the left to the third costal cartilage on the right. So this gives us the superior border. Let me use this red marker. So from the second to the third costal cartilages. You know, the ribs are attached to the sternum via these costal cartilages. Then we come to the right border. So the right border is from the third costal cartilages down towards the sixth. So third, fourth, fifth, and the sixth coastal cartilages just closer to this right sternal line or the right sternal border. Okay, so this gives us the right border of the heart. Now let's look at the inferior border. So the inferior border is coming from the 6th costal cartilage to the apex of the heart, and the apex is basically in the 5th intercostal space. So the space between the 5th and the 6th rib, this is called the 5th intercostal space. So this is basically the apex of the heart. Now what is the apex? Look here. So this portion of the heart is literally the apex of the heart, and so this apex is projecting this way. So this is basically how the heart is projecting, right? So the apex of the heart is in the 5th intercostal space. So this, from the 6th costal cartilage to the apex, form the inferior border of the heart, which is basically resting on this dome-shaped organ here called the diaphragm. Then let's look at the left border of the heart. So the left border is from the 2nd costal cartilage to the apex. So that is basically to say the heart is more on the left part than it is on the right part of the thoracic cavity, right? So that is why if you are asked to point to where your heart is, you usually place your hand this way, because the heart is projected more in this direction than it is in this direction. So the apex is here, and this is from the left border, the right border, the inferior border, and the superior border. Now if the apex is here, where then can we find the base? So the base is basically in this direction. So this is very interesting to know about the heart. The apex is pointing downward, and then the base is coming this way and pointing backward, like going towards the vertebral column, right? So basically, and it is in the base here. Here you find all these big structures, but we'll come there when we look at the syntopy. So this is the complete skeletopy of the heart. Let us look at the syntopy of the heart. That is the projection of the heart to surrounding structures, or the structures basically around the heart. Now, let us look here. Now we know the different borders of the heart. So which structures can we find here? On the left border, which structures can be on the right? Which structures can be above superiorly? Which structures can be inferiorly? Which structures can be posteriorly? And which structures can be anteriorly? Now let's look at it one by one. That is, we are going to first of all look at structures that are superior here. Structures that are located in the superior parts of the heart. So one, we have the great vessels. We look at the ascending aorta. Then we also look at the pulmonary trunk. We also look at the bifurcation of the trachea. You know, the trachea comes and bifurcates at the level of T5 to T4, T4, T5. That means the level of the 4th and 5th thoracic vertebrae. So the bifurcation point is basically superior to the heart. So basically here we have the bifurcation of the trachea. So the trachea bifurcates and gives off the two main bronchi. Now let's look at the inferior structures. So structures that are inferior. If we have structures that are superior, then what other structures are below here? The heart, inferior structures. So we say inferior. The main inferior structure here is the diaphragm. And basically we can see some portion of the liver, because the liver is basically just below the diaphragm. Then let's look at the posterior structures, structures that are behind the heart. So posteriorly, posterior structure, we can find the esophagus and the thoracic aorta. Also, we can find posteriorly the vertebral column, especially the thoracic vertebrae. So these are the posterior structures of the heart. Now let's look at the lateral structures, structures that are lateral to the heart, on the left part and on the right part. So laterally, especially one on the right, we have here the right lung. And then on the left, we have the left lung. But then there is something to note. So the heart is more on the left than it is on the right. So that is why you can see from this orientation, the heart projecting more towards the left. So now let's look at the anterior part. The anterior part. Which organs or which structures can we find in the anterior part? Anteriorly, you can see the sternum. Also, we can see the costal cartilages. This one's costal cartilages. This is the sternum. And then we can see the thigh bones. And another structure you can find in the anterior part is the internal thoracic vessels. This is basically the complete topographic anatomy of the heart. First of all, we look at the holotopy, which we said is in the middle mediastinum here, and then we look at the skeletopy. So the skeletopy, we look at the relation here with the skeletal structure. So on the left, we say the second rib, starting here, the superior border on the second costal cartilage to the third costal cartilage on the right. Then we look at the right border, starting from the third costal cartilage to the sixth costal cartilage. That forms the right border. The inferior border is formed from the sixth costal cartilage to the fifth intercostal space, which is where the apex of the heart, this part of the heart, is actually located. Then we look at the left border from the second costal cartilage coming down towards the fifth intercostal space. And this is basically medial to the linea medial clavicularis or mid-clavicular line. Then we look at some of the basic syntopy of the heart. That means which structures can we find in the anterior part, posterior, laterally and inferiorly. Of course, we look at here the posterior structures we can find, the superior structures we can find, the ascending aorta, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary vessels, and then the bifurcation of the trachea, which gives us the main bronchi. Then we look at the inferior parts, we can see the diaphragm and of course the liver, basically inferiorly. Then posteriorly, that means the back or the posterior parts of the heart, we can see the esophagus, which are structures in the posterior mediastinum, the thoracic aorta and the thoracic vertebrae. Then laterally, on each side, we can see the lungs. So on the right side and on the left side. Then we have the anterior part, which is anterior structures can be the sternum, this bone you're seeing, the costal cartilages connecting to the sternum, and the thymus. Then we have the internal thoracic vessels. Now, the heart also is in its own cavity in the thoracic cavity called the pericardial cavity. So this is the complete topography of the heart. Now, more detailed notes is available on our website. You can go and download and see all the structures and all the labeling correctly there and study for your exams. Now, in the next video, we are going to look at complete gross anatomy of the heart. Now, I will encourage you to watch all our videos in orderly manner to better understand the complete anatomy of the cardiovascular system.